These texts weren't in the canonical gospel, so what was their status? Did this even mean that the gospels themselves didn't transmit the whole of Jesus' teaching? This was risky territory for Bible-believing Christians.
This is the story of hidden teachings, concealed for centuries, that could have reshaped Christianity as we know it. Graham Hancock, along with other researchers like JRE's Joe Rogan, has brought attention to these long-lost gospels and their suppressed wisdom. What if the most profound messages from Jesus never made it into the Bible? What if the very essence of his teachings was erased to protect power and control? Buried in desert caves and forgotten monasteries, these texts reveal an alternative Christianity.
Discoveries have revolutionized our understanding of early Christianity. A fascinating collection of texts, most of which have never been known before.
One with radical visions of spiritual enlightenment, reincarnation, and a deep connection to the divine within. The early Christian diversity. In the centuries following Jesus' death, early Christian communities were filled with a diversity of beliefs and texts. The Bible, as we know it today, wasn't the sole narrative of Jesus' life and teachings. Dozens of gospels circulated, each presenting a different version of who Jesus was and what he taught. The early church was not unified. There were competing visions of Christianity, from those who saw Jesus as a mystical figure to others who viewed him more traditionally as a divine savior. The pivotal turning point came in 325 CE. This was not just a theological gathering, it was the beginning of a political move to standardize Christianity. While the council didn't finalize the Bible as we know it, it set the stage for what would become the official narrative, effectively shutting out alternative views and texts that didn't align with the emerging orthodoxy. What many don't realize is that, for the first 300 years, the Christian community was a vibrant, fragmented tapestry of beliefs, many of which have been deliberately silenced. These suppressed teachings offered a much more nuanced and diverse picture of early Christianity than what ultimately became the official story. Criteria for exclusion. The process of determining which texts would be included in the Bible wasn't simply a spiritual decision. It was also about control. The early church fathers were particularly concerned with texts that emphasized personal revelation and mystical experiences. These were seen as a direct challenge to the growing institutional power of the church. Teachings that suggested people could access divine wisdom on their own, without the need for priests or bishops as intermediaries, were deemed dangerous. Similarly, gospels that portrayed women as spiritual equals rather than subordinates were also excluded. These texts, like the Gospel of Mary, threatened the patriarchal structure that was taking root in the church. Writings that offered a deeper, more esoteric understanding of Jesus' message, like the Gospel of Thomas, were seen as heretical. These Gospels didn't just provide alternative views on Jesus' teachings. They presented a Jesus who was more concerned with personal transformation and inner divinity than with external rituals and doctrines. This was a direct threat to the church's growing authority. The criteria for inclusion were not just theological, they were deeply political. The church needed a unified, controllable doctrine, one that could be easily taught and enforced across the Roman Empire. Alternative gospels, however, offered a much more complex and fluid understanding of Christianity. The discovery at Nag Hammadi. Everything changed in December 1945 when an Egyptian farmer near Nag Hammadi made a groundbreaking discovery: 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 texts, many of which were previously unknown or thought to be lost forever. This collection of manuscripts, hidden in a sealed jar, included writings that would forever alter our understanding of early Christianity. Among these were the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Mary, texts that had been suppressed for centuries by the church. This discovery, along with the earlier finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, revolutionized the way scholars understood the diversity of Christian thought in its formative years. These ancient texts opened a window into a Christianity far more diverse, mystical, and philosophically sophisticated than what the Orthodox Church would have us believe. What the Nag Hammadi texts revealed was not just a series of alternative gospels, but a whole spiritual movement, one that emphasized direct spiritual experience, personal enlightenment, and the recognition of the divine within each individual. These teachings, once suppressed and dismissed as heresy, are now regarded as key to understanding the early Christian landscape, showing us how different Christianity could have been if these voices had been allowed to survive. The Gospel of Thomas. Among the most revolutionary texts discovered at Nag Hammadi is the Gospel of Thomas, which offers no birth story, miracles, or crucifixion narrative. Instead, it contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus, focusing on wisdom and inner transformation. Unlike the canonical Gospels, Thomas invites readers to look within for spiritual truth rather than relying on external rituals. The Gospel of Thomas opens with an invitation. Whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. This offers a path to spiritual enlightenment through self-discovery. Many sayings echo the teachings of the canonical Gospels, but others are radically different. In saying 3, Jesus says, "When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known." This suggests that salvation comes not through faith in Jesus' death, but through deep self-awareness. The Gospel of Thomas presents a Jesus focused on personal awakening, emphasizing internal spiritual wisdom. Inner divinity and spiritual awakening. One of the most striking themes in the Gospel of Thomas is the idea of inner divinity, the belief that the divine exists within each person and that true salvation comes through recognizing this internal spark of the divine. In saying 70, Jesus declares, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This suggests a transformative spirituality where personal awakening is key to salvation. This teaching is echoed in other suppressed Gospels like the Gospel of Philip. In this text, salvation isn't about external rituals, but manifesting one's divine nature. "You saw the Spirit, you became Spirit," it says, suggesting spiritual awakening is an internal, personal process, not one dependent on institutional authority. The Gospel of Thomas presents a view of salvation that emphasizes self-awareness and inner transformation. Mary Magdalene's role. The Gospel of Mary reveals Mary Magdalene as Jesus' closest disciple and spiritual heir, directly contradicting the later portrayal of her as a reformed prostitute. In this text, Mary is entrusted with profound teachings that the other apostles were not privy to. The Gospel shows Mary stepping forward to comfort the disciples after Jesus' departure, offering wisdom and reassurance. Her leadership is quickly challenged by the disciples, particularly Peter, who questions her authority. The Gospel of Mary highlights not just the tension over female leadership in early Christianity, but also the profound spiritual teachings that Mary carried. Her role as a key figure in early Christianity is suppressed by the Church, which sought to marginalize female spiritual leadership. This tension between the acknowledgement of Mary's authority and the patriarchal structure of the emerging Church illustrates how early Christian communities grappled with gender and spiritual authority. Reincarnation in early Christianity. One of the most startling revelations from these suppressed Gospels is the belief in reincarnation, which was common in early Christianity, but later purged by the Church. Texts like the Epistle of Sophia describe how souls reincarnate to continue their spiritual journey. This idea is also hinted at in the Gospel of John, where Jesus' conversation about a man born blind suggests pre-existence. Additionally, when Jesus identifies John the Baptist as the reincarnated Elijah, it directly challenges the Church's later stance. The Church officially rejected reincarnation at the Second Council of Constantinople in 553 CE, but the earlier teachings of reincarnation had profound implications for the Church's authority. If reincarnation were accepted, the urgency of conversion would lessen, diminishing the Church's control over spiritual destinies and people's sense of salvation. The political nature of biblical censorship. The suppression of alternative gospels was deeply political. After Constantine's conversion, the Church recognized Christianity's potential as a unifying force in the Roman Empire, but it needed control over the narrative. The diverse teachings circulating in early Christian communities posed a threat to this control. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE set a precedent for imperial involvement in religious matters, but its focus wasn't just theological, it was about establishing a unified doctrine. Over time, church leaders like Bishop Athanasius dictated which texts were canonical and which were heretical. This censorship wasn't driven solely by spirituality, but by the need for centralized power. Gospels emphasizing personal spiritual experience, or women's equality, for example, were suppressed because they threatened the hierarchical control the Church was building. The Church's goal was to create a doctrine that unified believers and reinforced its authority. The journey into the lost Gospels reveals a Christianity far more diverse and mystical than what we see today. These suppressed teachings, which focus on inner divinity, reincarnation, and personal spiritual awakening, offer a radical perspective on Jesus' message that was erased by political and religious forces. In a world increasingly seeking deeper meaning, these ancient texts may hold the keys to a more inclusive and transformative spirituality, one that transcends the limitations of institutionalized religion. Perhaps, as we rediscover these hidden truths, we are not only unlocking the past, but also forging a path forward in our quest for enlightenment.